Are live. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I'm one of your hosts, but I'm going to hand this wonderful movie that we're going to discuss over to the lady of the group. Hello, Katie.
Hey guys, Katie Cadaver here. I'm back again for an exciting film. I am happy to be joined by our usual cast, minus Dustin, but we've got Dave, Brandon, and Jake in attendance, and I think Dustin will
Hi.
hopefully be coming later.
Hello.
So, hey guys.
Hi.
And on tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about George A. Romero's possibly little known movie from 1981, Knightriders. I'm curious to hear if you guys had seen this one before, because I actually had not even heard of this until very recently. But it stars Ed Harris in like his third movie, I think, and as well as Tom Savini, which I much enjoyed, and some other like lesser known actors and actresses who will show up in some other Romero films down the line here. But yeah, so spoiler warning, of course, we're going to talk about all the things. So if you haven't seen this movie from 1981, go back and watch it before you listen to us. So I should probably read a synopsis too about our film, shouldn't I?
Yeah.
All right.
I have it here. Give me 1 second. I apologize for the dead air. I was ill prepared with the synopsis. Okay, here we go. Billy is the undisputed leader of a roving band of hardened bikers who support themselves by jousting at medieval fairs and selling their intricately designed wares. As their fearsome reputation and popularity grow, commercial pressures begin tearing the tightly knit group apart. Despite Billy's attempts to maintain his noble and chivalrous vision, his star performer entertains outside offers while his arch rival Morgan prepares for a final battle. So that's a very interesting way to talk about a movie that basically mixes like Mad Max, like motorcycle bikers with the Renaissance Fair. So it's a fun one. And like I said, I hadn't really even heard of it. It's George Romero's film between Dawn of the Dead and Creepshow. So I have not seen his complete filmography, but I was excited. I actually learned about this from a friend of our podcast, Michael Vyers, who does the Shameless Picture Show podcast. And they actually did an episode on this film as well. But when he had discovered it, he talked to me about it and asked if I had seen it, and I had not seen it. But just when I heard what it was, basically Renaissance Fair with motorcycles, I had to see it. So I thought it would be a really fun one for us to talk about because, it's by a horror director who's very highly regarded. And I know that we're not all huge horror fans, so I thought it would be fun to kind of do a film directed by a horror director that wasn't actually a horror film. So just briefly, my first impressions of it, it's definitely not as much about the motorcycles and the Renaissance Fair as it might look like it is. It's very, that's very much just a setting, and we have this really intricate character story going on, which I really related to. So I enjoyed it. I watched it twice before this evening. So it's a newer one for me in the last like month or so. So kind of like a first watch. So I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say. Why don't you go ahead, Brandon?
This is definitely a first watch for me. I had not even actually heard of this film, but seeing the director actually intrigued me. And then learning that it was actually a part of a three-picture deal, which involved Creepshow and Dawn of the Dead, that also intrigued me more. So I had to check it out, and it definitely left me. I don't know, actually. I still don't know exactly how I feel about the film. But it definitely was different from a lot of the stuff I'm used to.
Cool. Why don't we hear from you, Dave?
Oh well. I've actually seen this film before. I own it, and I thought it was definitely a weird, almost a. It's like in between like a comedy and a mystical fantasy film.
Sure.
To me, I've always enjoyed going to Bristol Renaissance Fair, and I swear to God, I used to go there and just mess with the people because they're supposed to stay in character, when they put on their show and whatnot. So to me, I imagine that this is the same kind of thing where Billy was this character where he had a bunch of people follow him into the great beyond and became kind of a troupe kind of a thing. And as they became more popular, other people ended up having other ideas. So I thoroughly enjoyed the film, and I forgot how much time Stephen King was eating during the film. So it was.
Yeah, Stephen King makes a nice cameo there, playing a Jordy Verrill type in the stands or whatever, watching these jousting
Right.
matches happen. So hey, Jake, since I hear you in the background there, why don't you tell us what you thought?
Well, I thought that was Stephen King, and then I looked at IMDb and I was like, oh yeah, I recognize his ugly mug anywhere. But
Yeah.
but yeah, I had never heard of well, I can't say I'd never heard of the movie, but I'm not sure that I'd ever heard of the movie until it was put forward as a possible for this viewing. And I have to admit, the one-line synopsis of medieval fair with motorcycles intrigued me because of its absurdity. So I was interested, and the idea that it was George Romero, even though I'm not a big horror fan, I'm always curious to see people outside of their comfort zone, if you will. This is definitely outside of his usual wheelhouse. So I was very curious about it. And when I had no idea until I sat down to watch it that Ed Harris starred in it. I'd overlooked that part. And I was like, Ed freaking Harris stars in this? Okay, I've got to see it. I felt it meandered a lot. It didn't have to be 2.5 hours, I thought. Although apparently it was originally supposed to be 17 hours, so we got off easy.
Yeah, really.
but overall, though, I liked it. I found it to be just somehow likable. You know what I mean? Like one of those movies that you just kind of you're watching it and you're going, yeah, I'll be getting this one of these days.
Oh, for sure.
Yep.
Well, I see that Dustin has joined us. Dustin, we're doing first impressions of the film. If you want to give us your first impression.
Correct. Well, this movie was so long and today was so full. I was kind of delayed, but we just wrapped it, and I didn't quite know what to make of this because it's so bizarre and unique. It's like a Ren fair and a biker gang and a hippie commune. Like, what is going on? And it's very ambitious. So I think that's my overall impression of it. Ambitious. And also surprising that it's not like a thing that exists in the world now. It's like with all the people who like to do like LARPing and just all this other kind of like role play stuff, you would think that this would exist somewhere in the world already.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that it doesn't too, because it's a pretty like kick-ass concept actually. And there's a little piece of trivia about that when I think when George Romero originally brought forth the script, it was just a regular like Ren fair setup or with horses or whatever. And one of the producers thought it would be better if he's like, put some motorcycles in it and then you have a movie. And I believe Romero was not too keen on the idea until all of a sudden he was, and thought, meh, why not? And pitched it, and it became a thing. But yeah, I was definitely pulled in by that concept too. But there's so much going on in the plot here,
Like,
and
no kidding.
it's very thick. And really, what I pulled out of the plot that I related to so much is that it's like this challenge about keeping this group of misfits kind of together and doing this thing. Like Billy really has this code of ethics, or like these principles that he's trying to live by and trying to lead these people by. And I kind of relate to that when I think about what I do creatively with burlesque and being a producer of a group. Like, I have a creative vision and I have a certain code of ethics that I abide by. And while I don't have Hollywood banging my door down to try to, get me to sell out or whatever, I understand like this whole dynamic that was like pulling our characters in different directions, and sort of this struggle that Billy goes through with how to stay true to his vision, but also keep this group happy. And it's really it's a tough spot being the king, and he was the king as a character in this show, but he was really the king of this group too. And really, I picked up on that struggle so much, just as it relates to what I do creatively. And I liked that this plot was I was expecting this movie to just be a lot of fun, and it was, but it was also really plot heavy, which I enjoyed.
All right.
Was this before or after Dawn of the Dead?
This was after Dawn of the Dead, right before Creepshow. So in between.
Because pretty much everybody from Dawn of the Dead seemed to be in this.
And some people from Creepshow. I think they were working on the screenplay for Creepshow.
Stephen King was in this.
Well, that's why, because that was why, because they were working on Creepshow. So he was like, I guess they were like, well, why don't you go ahead and film a scene or something?
I'll do it.
But,
well,
yeah.
I know that his contract for the 3 films was one of the things that was very free for him, that he had to do a Living Dead type movie. I think he had to do a sequel, and then after that he had free reign for the other 2 films, which is how we got that film in the first place. Which is kind of cool that he was given that free reign.
Well,
yeah,
I feel like this whole plot is kind of like a metaphor to me, and the reason being is that I think it's almost like he's saying that, okay, look, this is an independent, this is an independent society. Look what happens when some people get stardom. Some people stay, some people go. But in this particular film, all the original people who went away came back because they missed the place, But in a sense, to me, it's like saying what's happening to the independent world of film.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good parallel to draw, because I could see how Romero could relate to Billy himself, with his filmmaking. I think it's a really great framework of like any sort of where you're sort of stuck in the middle between like selling out, because you do, when you're doing a creative project, you typically do have an overhead. I know for me, I always have overhead with what I'm trying to create, and it's tempting to want to get that money from somewhere other than my own pocket, right? And that's kind of what we see here in our plot, is like when it starts to get tough and there's these options to like break this code of ethics and kind of sell out and kind of go where the money is, then we kind of see what people are made of in that situation.
I think the way South Park put it was start up, sell out, bro down.
Right.
So,
well, and also, I think this one definitely, there was kind of a thriving independent cinema scene in the early 80s. And I see one of the little tidbits here is that there's actually a connection with some of my favorite group of independent filmmakers. This is apparently one of the production assistants on the film on Knightriders was Holly Hunter, who at the time was roommates with Frances McDormand and a fellow student with Joel Cohen. And that whole scene, along with Sam Raimi and Ethan Cohen and all them, that was a whole other big bit of independent cinema in the 80s. So I think that's kind of that idea of them trying to talk about not selling out and that kind of stuff. And you see the whole thing where like the one guy sells out and they give him this fancy outfit and everyone's just laughing all through the photo shoot and he's sitting there going, what? I'm supposed to look cool. No.
Oh, Tom Savini was awesome in this movie. I just have to say.
He was the movie.
I mean, he's near and dear to my heart anyways, but he was by and large my favorite character. I thought Tom Savini himself just did it very much. Did the character justice very much. I thought he was great. I mean, all the acting was really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I guess before you do that, we just a couple more bits about the plot. Basically, so we talked a little bit about the basic idea of this traveling sort of Renaissance fair, but with motorcycles, where Ed Harris's character is the king, and then of course Tom Savini is Morgan, who's like the
Black Knight,
Dark Prince, the Black Knight, whatever you want to call him, sort of the antagonist of the.
They did call him the Black Knight, though.
Yes, I believe they did. Yes,
Yeah.
And so then you get these people come calling. You get this so-called talent agent, played by Martin Ferrero in this super slimy mode, and I just think it's hilarious. It's the same. I think it's hilarious. It's the same dude that played Gennaro in Jurassic Park. It just. That connection for me.
Yeah.
I thought he looked really familiar.
The only one on my side is the blood-sucking lawyer.
Yes.
Thank you,
I
John.
always like that line. So basically, and then you got also this lady who I guess she said she was a TV producer. Did I understand that correctly?
I think
and
so.
her photographer friend who spent more time not making
Not
pictures.
photographing.
Not photographing.
Yes, that's what I meant to say.
Not photographing.
Getting
Yes,
wasted
exactly.
getting wasted with Friar Tuck.
Yes.
Yeah, she's getting on with Tuck.
And
That pizza.
oh man, yeah, that was interesting. Weird, but interesting. And then, of course, like you guys said, there's that part where they have to make a choice of, are we going to go with these people or are we going to go with Billy and do things as we've always done? And you've got his money guy, who's telling him, dude, you can't keep doing this. You got no money. And he's just like, well, it's the principle of it, and it's kind of, yeah, so you got all these outside influences, and it was kind of interesting how that all played around in the end. It was not the most complex plot in the world, but it had a lot of pieces. Yeah.
Well, at about an hour in, we got a speech from one of the characters when Billy is like talking about that.
Mhm.
And I wish I could remember it word for word, but the gist of it was, it's like, it's good to have principles, but the one thing that overrides all your principles is survival. Like, you need to do survival first, and then you can have ideals. So
Yeah.
I really
That's after
responded to that.
That's after he had spent the night in jail with someone who was put in there for
A corrupt cop, yeah.
Right.
And it feels like Billy was kind of riding that line, with this group the entire time. That line between survival and ideals. And trying to figure out which way to lean to basically keep things going.
I personally thought he was completely unreasonable, but man.
Well, I think he has a turning point. At one point we see him kind of start to question himself, like, looking at what can he possibly do better, by these people. And he eventually does kind of do what he needs to do to redeem himself.
Well, yeah,
Mhm.
he's a leader that everyone that seems to have followed him for some reason or higher cause. For whatever naturistic religious movement they might have actually began as, because there was one person who said something about you don't get it,
And heavy is the head that wears the crown. Billy was, had a lot on his shoulders in terms of, technically being the king of this group and having to lead them in. And then he also had Morgan kind of fighting for that spot. And Morgan's ideals were different. And I think, that was a major threat for Billy. But what I liked about Morgan, Tom Savini's character, is that he was kind of that antagonist to a point, but still very likable and still very much an important part of the group. Like, I think he wasn't your classic like shit character that was, antagonist and nothing else. He really had some redeeming qualities to him, and eventually I was at least convinced that he was going to make a good king.
Well,
I have to
I
admit,
agree.
though.
Yeah. I was going to say I agree with that. I didn't get to check in with Billy. I just wanted to say one thing real quick before we moved on to Morgan. I consider Billy's character almost to have a madness about him, or an insanity.
He did.
Yep.
They drive
which
that
was very
pretty hard at
different.
the end.
Which is very different to the other one, and that exchange at the beginning between him and Morgan, where Morgan has like, I've got this kick-ass mace, and he's like, yeah, it might be a little bit too hard to use, and then ends up basically going up against him, and he says, do you have like a death wish or something? It looks like you wanted me to use this mace on you just to basically prove a point. But just kind of shows the conflict in their personalities, whereas one is more pragmatic, a little bit big-headed, but definitely pragmatic, and the other is, well, not so much.
Unstable. Yeah.
I do have to say, though, Billy's character frustrated me. I felt like it was really hard to get a bead on exactly what was driving him for much of the film. And there were times where he seemed to be kind of contradicting himself a little. And that some of this may be that madness or whatever. And I might have missed something, along the lines. But I felt like he was a little kind of swung for the fences a little much. And
that's that meandering you're talking about.
Yes. And one thing that I couldn't help but wondering is, nowadays Ed Harris is one of the strongest actors in Hollywood. He was one of the only watchable parts in Run All Night. The movie put me to sleep, but every scene he was in, I was like, okay, I can watch this part. But I'm kind of wondering, like, if he had this level of experience and tackled that role, it would have been completely different. But then that would have been a completely different character too. But I just couldn't help but wondering that. But I do think, as far as the Morgan character, there was also a sort of an outside expectation. Did anyone else feel like he, with that goatee or whatever that he had and everything, was anyone else reminded of the Sheriff of Rottingham from Men in Tights? It's like setting him up to me. The whole time I just couldn't think, like, okay, well, he's definitely the antagonist. There's no other way to look at it. But anyway, but yeah, I agree that he was a very interesting character and did a very good job with it.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with him.
Yeah.
And then we had the Alan character, who is kind of like Billy's biggest supporter. And he had his own little side story kind of going on, where he picks up a little girlfriend along the way. And if anybody noticed, his girlfriend, I think Julie was her name, played by Patricia Tallman, who's also in the 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead, directed by Tom Savini. She plays our main lead in that one. And her her deal too was like she's kind of trying to escape her bad home situation, abusive alcoholic dad, and she wants to like run away with, she meets our Alan character and they have their little love at first sight, and she wants to run away with the medieval motorcycle riders, and that's kind of like a little subplot within our story. Don't know if anybody had anything to say on that.
I kind of missed that. Like I remember they drop her off, and it was like, did they just leave her there?
Well, I think what Alan realizes there is that she's kind of just using him to get away from her family life. Like maybe they really weren't that connected, because it seems like he and the Queen sort of are feeling each other at the end there. So I think there was kind of something with that, where he wasn't really feeling this girl and just realized that she was kind of using him to get away from her home situation.
Right.
See, I didn't feel like they did very well with that plot line, because I didn't feel like it went very far. I felt
I barely noticed it.
There were a couple of negatives with the plot in the film, such as I felt like there was a lot of aimlessness, and I did feel like that particular plot line was part of it. I felt like it was just something that kind of distracted from the whole, which is where I feel like the film's greatest weakness is it had a lot of distractions.
Well, we did have some pretty long, extended motorcycle battle scenes that probably could have been cut down a little bit. And if nobody really has any more on the characters, we could talk about those extended motorcycle scenes, which are kind of our our stunts. This movie was more stunt heavy than it was special effects heavy, obviously.
I just want a quick shout out to Merlin because he was cool.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we never did talk about Merlin.
It was kind of cool.
I mean, we had so many fun characters in there.
Actually, though, they originally approached Morgan Freeman for that character.
Nice.
Yes. Yeah, he was not having it.
Well, he didn't like that they indicated that Romero had indicated that the character was black.
Right.
And Romero had said, well, the reason for that was pretty simple. If he had not, the casting director would have just automatically cast him as a white guy.
Right.
And but Morgan Freeman still wasn't having that, so he had to.
Well, Romero always liked to give people like chances to be in roles and to like create characters.
Well, and he had originally saw Morgan Freeman on Electric Company and wanted him based on that.
Yeah, he just liked
he wasn't
people
famous
work that he felt deserved it.
Yeah, he wasn't famous at the time, but that would have been a very different part if Morgan Freeman had played that part.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I agree, but he would also have been just as young as Ed Harris was in this role.
Yeah.
My God.
And of course, the guy they did go with was the guy who went by the name Brother Blue. Well, this was apparently his only acting credit.
Really?
He's best known as a storyteller and as he was a pastor at Harvard Divinity School. That's
Well, he did a good job with the part. That was for
yeah,
sure.
he did. It was very interesting.
He kind of reminded me of the caretaker, the guy, the black guy in the Shining, where
yeah.
Where he had the Shining,
except he doesn't just show up to get owned.
Yeah.
Well, he had sort of the medicine man shaman role here.
They said that he was still a licensed doctor.
Yeah, and I like how they pointed that out. Actually, they were like, "Yeah, he's a medically trained doctor," and they were like, No way. He's like, yes, no, he is.
And the racism that they had to deal with on the scenes just for having him cast was quite amazing. There were lots of people who were like, "No, we don't want him here." It's quite a different time when it comes. Oh yeah, they had to deal with a lot of racism on where they were filming because they were filming in the South.
Oh, yeah.
And keep in mind, South in the 70s. Well, maybe not that different from how it can be at times,
now.
but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, we haven't.
Okay, this says it was filmed in Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay. Well, then it's even worse for the fact that they had to deal with so much
Cairns
racism.
of Georgia. Understood.
South of Canada, I guess.
But still, I can't remember. It was something because I remember them talking about it in one of the features. Was they
Right.
were talking about how they had to deal with it, and Romero wasn't having any of the talk, basically.
Right.
And neither was, gosh, what was his name? The lead, God,
Ed Harris.
Ed Harris?
yeah, Ed Harris was not having anything with that either. He would not meet with or see anybody who was treating anybody like that. So, yeah, interesting, minor things.
Right.
Does anybody want to comment on any of our other secondary characters at all before we move on?
I liked the little romance that Tom Savini's character had with the mechanic. Like that was kind of a nice touch.
Little
We didn't
bit
get a
of
lot of it, but I
trivia
appreciated it.
that mechanic was actually George Romero's wife.
Oh,
Huh.
Woo.
Interesting.
Moving on.
That'll help keep production costs down a bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anything else?
That character where they put him on a bike and he kind of had a bald head, and I like that little comedy that one friar was talking to him like there's a helmet to fit your bald head or something like that, you know.
Use the helmet.
Yeah.
It's that thing shaped like your head.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of those fun little moments in this one. And that Friar Tuck character was good for those. Another funny one too is where he's he's hiding his distillery or whatever, and when the cops are coming and they're like, it's not illegal, but it's, and he says, but it's more fun to pretend that it is.
Yep. More fun.
Yeah, he was a fun-loving character. I enjoyed him too. And I also liked, I think her name was Rocky, the female knight.
Okay. Yeah.
She was a lot of fun to watch too. I liked her. She was very spunky.
When she pulled up on that dude who I just aforementioned, she was real. Well, you got to have balls to deal with us, or something like that.
Yes.
Right.
So I guess we can go ahead and talk about the stunts. Like I said, it's a little bit more a stunt movie than it was a special effects movie. We did get a little blood here and there, but a lot of flipping off of motorcycles and crashing. And I did absolutely zero research about any of the stunts that went into this, so I don't have any numbers or figures on any of it. But I thought it was all really well done, and it looked, I mean, that's all practical stuff, so it looked great.
Right. And actually, I suspect, I didn't see this necessarily, but I suspect that may have been why they went with motorcycles in the first place. Because either way, you'll have to deal with stunt people and some very intricate, involved stunt liabilities and insurance and all that stuff. But that's better than throwing horses into the mix.
Yeah.
Oh,
well, it definitely added a more exciting element.
Right.
And it makes what they're doing really unique. Like,
It does.
if you think about Renaissance Fair, like, yeah, anybody, that can be recreated all over the world. But this, adding the motorcycles in there really made what they were doing unique. And it really, for me, brought out that idea that they were kind of like this group of outcasts or misfits, that they were doing something different and they knew it. And I so relate to that as a creative person, because even what I do within burlesque and with the group that I have, it is so much different. We are the group of outcasts, misfits that are doing the weird things, and I so just see that in this, like it has absolutely nothing to do with what I do, but it's still kind of the same idea. And I don't know, I so gravitated to that with this film.
Well, they weren't doing Renaissance fairs, at least not like that at the time, or at least not often. This might have started helping kick that off.
Yeah, I don't know the history of
never
Renaissance
know.
fairs or where they started or any of that, but
They started with
you know,
nerds.
yeah, well, clearly, as most cool things do.
Although
But
you wouldn't
yes,
necessarily know it from this one, like one of the parts that I found very interesting, there was probably a little bit of commentary back to the idea of like being able to stay true to your vision or selling out or all that kind of stuff. You had like early on the audiences, they looked like they were kind of into it, they were kind of getting it. You know, you had Stephen King playing the heckler, and you had a couple other people who were heckling, but you also had some people who were like really genuinely into it. You know, but there probably were a lot of nerds in the audience, you know, that sort of thing. And then later, once the agent gets his hooks into them, and they start getting more violent, I was sitting there thinking, wow, suddenly I'm watching either NASCAR or hockey. I'm not sure which, but it was like that sort of bloodlust from the crowd. And then, you know, toward the end, it seemed like the audience was back to a more reasonable level. And so
yeah,
I was definitely, yeah.
Yeah,
it was definitely illustrated how, yeah, once the Hollywood types got their claws into it, that it did begin to change what it was.
that makes me think of there's a quote that's from a longer discussion that I was listening to about Starship Troopers, and one of the lines was that you can't have a truly anti-war movie because the depiction of war itself is inherently thrilling, and that makes me think of that, just in terms of how the crowd was like responding to things becoming like more intense and more violent, and it seemed like there would be a lot of crossover with like the hockey or NASCAR crowd just to see like the carnage.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I've seen some
That's why
war
I'd be there.
footage. I feel like I've seen some war movies where the footage was more depressing than thrilling.
They were specifically referring to combat because at the end of the day, the guts aren't yours.
Yeah, and you are kind of pulling for someone to come through. So yeah, I see your point. Yeah,
I'll link it to you. It's a really good talk.
Yeah. Now there are exceptions, of course. Like depending on, well, again, it depends on what you look at as combat. Like for instance,
Starship Troopers.
I've seen. Well, yeah. Well, I mean, for instance, watching a movie called Barefoot Gen, where you actually get to see their rendition of the atomic bomb going off and vaporizing people in the aftermath of that. Of course, that's a different aspect of war, but definitely didn't make me want to go to war after that.
right.
Yeah, nobody wants to go to war after seeing the Hiroshima bomb.
No, not so
now
much.
we're a few movies back now, guys. We're getting off topic.
Okay. All right.
Does anybody else have anything with the stunts or the special effects or any of that?
I mean, they were all great. Like, I feel like their armor should have maybe been a little bit heavier, because a lot of the armor we see them wearing is just like leather pads, and it looks like.
And you'll notice there's a point to where I think Morgan brings up the fact that he has his own armor or whatever, and everybody else is kind of just using whatever they scrounge up.
Yeah.
And it really illustrated about his character, like how serious he really took what he was doing. And I think it was also reflective of like they didn't have a lot of money. They were just skating by, and so they didn't have a lot to put into this. And that was kind of part of the allure with the Hollywood people coming in, and then they get this new armor which looked like styrofoam or whatever. But
Sure.
I was gonna say the armor looked terrible as far as
Yeah, it looked like
it looked
shit, for
awful.
sure. It
And
was
there is
bad.
something like the other stuff. It did look flimsy, and it looked kind of sad, and but yeah, like you said, it kind of was indicative of how much money they really had to work with. And from what I understand, a lot of like in actual, medieval times and whatnot, most people weren't decked out in really great looking stuff. It was
Sure.
Armor was
yeah,
expensive.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
It would have been more like leather pads, maybe a bit of chainmail, that sort of thing. Like,
Oh yeah,
or yeah,
and it's too. I mean,
right.
and real medieval type things. If you look at it, even in Jabberwocky, which is a comedy relation, it does go into how heavy armor really is. Of course, the scene where they have knights playing hide and seek in the heavy armor is probably the only one that got a chuckle of me in that movie. But that concept of how heavy the armor actually is does
Jabberwocky
play
sucks.
out.
Noted. Your opinion is noted, Brandon.
Yeah. But as far as other scenes with the special effects go, I mean, that scene where they had the motorcycle basically fly off and right into that woman.
Yeah.
That's pretty
That
believable.
was a pretty impressive and actually quite horrifying scene. That had
Right.
several notes that y'all were talking about earlier about the crowd switching back and forth between bloodlust and horror. It really was, in my opinion, probably one of the better ones out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. So what did we all think about the music? I know it was very like Renaissance fairy and
Right.
light,
You
but
know
I
what?
was gonna say that there is that song that they call back to at the end during spoiler alert, during Billy's funeral. With the guy on the guitar. I like that song. I thought that was really
Oh
a
yeah.
catchy tune.
Yeah,
So I
that was a
enjoyed
nice
that.
one.
I liked that there was banjo music at a certain point. That there was like kind of a sing along song at one point where it's like they all tuned in and sang it at
Yeah, it
one
was some
time,
hippie vibes for
like
sure.
some kumbaya.
Yeah, super hippie vibes. Yeah. You know, which
Right.
I think kind of painted the picture for us too of this group and I don't know, their way of life.
Well,
Those
and,
hippie
Yeah.
vibes were there.
and what's interesting is there were also two different types of drugs in the movie too. There was there was the regular pot or peyote or whatever, and then when they were at the pool, Tom Savina's character was like, "Give me the dope! Give me the dope!"
The dope.
That was still pot though.
Yeah,
Well,
dope does mean pot.
In
I
this
did like how
context, yeah.
they didn't allow it in the
Oh,
camp,
they
which
did.
was kind of cool.
Yeah. There was that one scene where, like, I think it was Steve lights up, and then Billy's like, "Yeah, get rid of that before we get back." It's like, yeah, I thought that
Well,
was
and
kind of
because the
interesting.
cops were like on their ass, that was one less problem they needed from the cops. Because
Well,
obviously
true.
that didn't go well for Bagman when he got the crap beat out of him.
Right. But yeah,
That's because they didn't pay him off.
Well, right, and again, that was Billy really sticking to his guns about the principles of the thing, and he wasn't trying to bend to this cop who was trying to abuse his authority.
right.
And it really shows us a lot about Billy's character in that instance, I think.
Mhm.
But again, to what point? Like, he realizes that he has to sacrifice one of his people, basically, to
Mhm.
uphold these principles. So he's constantly being faced with, these decisions, that are really tough decisions.
Right. And actually, yeah, I did like. Well, again, back to the idea of the with that song that you were talking about. That was a nice little callback there, and I agree. There was that one scene where he was talking with the musician, and he's like, "I really like that. I'd love to hear the song." And he's like, "Well, it's not finished." And he's like, "Well, I'd love to hear it." And he's like, "Well, I promise I'll play it for you one day." And then he did.
Aw,
I like that. I thought that was fun.
I miss that dialogue.
Yeah.
I think that's also the point
That's
where we see
awesome.
Billy kind of questioning himself. Like, I think he says something to the effect of like, I don't pay any attention to you guys, like the musicians and the jewelry makers and the people on the side, like he's so busy running this thing, that some of these smaller people of maybe less importance to the show but are still like the supporting cast, he feels like he's not as connected to them as he could be. And I think that's when he starts to question his leadership and what he could be doing better. So he does some like self-reflection in that moment.
Well, at one point he even goes on that little tirade where he actually rails against them, saying like, "Y'all are just trying to make a buck," yeah.
Almost looks at him with contempt at one point in the film.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess he was having second thoughts.
Well, and I think too that it's probably safe to say that our king had a little mental illness going on, in some respect.
Especially at the end, like after he's defeated and not the king anymore, and he just rides around for a while. Like he dies because he's hit by a truck. And before he dies, he has a vision of himself riding a horse, and it's like, oh, he was crazy this entire time.
Well, that's not how I took it. I took it as that he was so tired and like losing, just sort of losing it. He was losing blood because he was hurt and he was still going off and doing this stuff. Like that was his redemption moment. He had a mission, he wanted to go right some wrongs, and he went out to do that. And then
I think he was aware that he had, I think he felt, or I certainly felt, but I kind of felt like he kind of started thinking that a lot of this was his own hubris coming back to haunt him. Like there was that whole thing with the, what was it, the Blackbird or whatever it was, where he was like, he saw the guy and had to challenge him immediately because of the pattern on his shield. And it was like, he had been very, very headstrong, rushing into danger, doing, and it was, I think he kind of eventually was like, yeah, that was one of the reasons I think he stepped back and let the others decide who could carry on, was he kind of realized that his own hubris had been a big problem.
Not sustainable.
He was definitely having some self-realizations for sure.
At least it was all worth it. I was gonna say it was all worth it for that scene where he gets the cop back at the end.
When you're so busy trying,
I like how nobody had the cops back too. Like people are like cheering as he's like beating the cop up, and it's like, oh, he's a well-known piece of shit. Okay, yeah, get him.
When you're so busy trying to run things, sometimes it's hard to stop and step into the sunlight and see exactly how well your kingdom is. So I think that's what we're kind of talking about with that self-reflection there. So. But and I think he does some of that during this film, or his character does. And
his ending is so abrupt.
It is,
that you wonder if he could have done more, or what would have happened if he would have returned to the group.
Well, maybe he was imagining that his motorcycle was in fact a steed, and he was going on a quest.
Well, and that quest probably would have made up 3 or 4 of the 17 hours that were of the original cut.
That's right. It was supposed to be a series, wasn't it?
It was like a mini series. What the F?
They could have done that. They could have done that with this. I think it would work. We have enough characters and enough side plots going
Yeah,
on.
you could have, and it would have been interesting, definitely. And also, it's interesting. I like the idea that he did basically. Part of it was he threw his hands up in frustration, but he did basically give everyone a chance to. They all stormed off, but then they were like, "Well, so what are we going to do?" And he's like, "Oh, well, I like
They'll
you
be
here.
back.
We'll stay here. They'll be back." But just like, part of that might have been some continued hubris on his part, but part of it was him finally putting some faith in the others. And, it's kind of funny because the night before this, I watched another movie, Liz and the Bluebird, completely different movie, but had a lot of the same plot beats. It was really weird. Because learning to let go so that someone can make their own choices is kind of a universal theme that you see now and then, and that's
a good
kind
way
of
to
fun.
describe it.
Yeah.
Learning to let go. And I think that line is even in that song at the end. Learn to let go or something like that. And yeah, it's as a leader, I think it's hard in general to know where to let go, where to steer the ship, and you're constantly riding that line all the time. Because as a leader, you do a lot, but you can't do it all. You have to delegate some of the responsibilities, and you have to be able to let go of whatever the result of delegating those responsibilities out is going to be. And it's hard when it's like your creative vision or sort of your baby. And that's kind of what it felt like here. Like this was Billy's baby, this show that he was traveling and putting on. And I think it's hard when it becomes that many moving parts. Like it's really not, it wasn't his alone anymore. And he was still, I think, struggling with letting go of that and letting it sort of grow and change into what it was meant to be.
Well, I think that it has a lot to do with change. A lot of people have sometimes problems with when things change. I mean, you have to change your clothes when you get up. You have to, change
But I think,
positions when you're sitting in a chair.
and for Billy, this was, this thing he built was definitely changing, and he was like pushing against that in a lot of respects. And sometimes I think it was warranted, and other times maybe he was a little bit cuckoo,
A little?
Well, it's
I mean,
subjective, I think.
I was kind of on Tom Savini's side the entire time. It's like, why don't you like monetize this just a little bit, Like, yeah.
Well,
I personally didn't like Billy.
He was such
yeah.
a bastard. But that's why he had to love himself, because everybody thought he was a bastard. I loved that line. I have to love myself. Everyone else thinks I'm a bastard.
Yeah, that was a good one.
If I was there, I'd have been like, I think you're pretty cool. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm
just
weird.
a little bit my idol, Tom Savini. I've met him. He was very gracious to me, I must say.
It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that he's in ill health these days.
Tom Savini is doing great.
Yeah, he looks pretty healthy. He's like what, 70 something? He's like ultra buff.
72. Yeah,
he posts shirtless photos on Instagram.
I put money into his Nightmare City campaign, and he posts from time to time about how ill he is, and how his doctor told him to stay out, stay away from,
stay inside.
Activity. So
I have not heard this.
So
yeah, didn't he just start? He just got commissioned to do like a program through, I think, like the Stan Winston School or something like that. Like he's doing some effects program in New York.
I got involved. I think I put like $50 into his Nightmare City campaign, which he was redoing Umberto Lenzi's the classic Nightmare City from the 1980s. And I think they were waiting around for like distribution or something like that, and then all of a sudden he like got a serious wave of illness while he was trying to film or film the thing or something like that, or find the locations or something like that, and then he had to stop production for a little bit. So I don't know whether that is still ongoing, but his health was failing him at the moment. Several years, like 2 years ago. So I don't know whether it's.
Well, he seems to be doing great now. So
Don't die on us. We can't take it.
And I wonder what's happening with the Nightmare City project. Tell me.
well, you can always use your trusty Google machine and look it up.
True.
I've just been like tweeting the people and seeing if they answer. That seems to.
That sometimes works. I've heard if you at somebody on Twitter, the chances of them responding are pretty good.
Well, I asked like Tony Todd a question and he answered it and followed me. So hooray!
Nice. Hey, Candyman.
Just so long as you didn't say it 5 times.
Well, Art the Clown follows me too, David H. Gordon. So we trade left-leaning jokes. It's kind of awesome.
It'd definitely be nice if Mr. Savini stays around long enough to do more Machete films. I thought it was hilarious when I found out that he was in those.
Yeah, those are good.
Well, that was his Dawn of the Dead character on Machete. So, which sort of brings to, I mean, I didn't get to do like my like first like thing with this movie. So I had no idea this existed. And I was listening to the commentary for Creepshow and Dawn of the Dead and like all these other and Land of the Dead and all these Romero projects, and they kept talking about this thing called Knightriders, and I just kept going, "What the is Knightriders? What are they talking about?" And it's like, oh, apparently it's a movie that I've literally never heard of, and now we've seen it, and it's pretty cool. Also available here on YouTube somehow.
Yep. I
thought it was.
Yeah,
I sent it. I sent the link to the group, so
you can go watch it too.
It's like I saw this. It starred the Hoff.
No, that's Knight Rider.
Slightly different.
Yeah, there wasn't exactly a motorcycle called Kit in here.
I mean, motorcycle Renaissance Fair talking car that helps.
Yeah,
it could have been a crossover.
It's a natural,
I mean,
it's a natural
equally
thing.
absurd ideas. Yeah,
and
so,
you never know. I don't think they really said what the motorcycles' names were, did they?
I don't think they had any names.
No.
Well, we're rounding out at about an hour, guys, so I'm thinking we should wrap up with any additional things, history or behind-the-scenes stuff. We've talked about a lot of that. Rotten Tomatoes, I think it has a fresh score on Rotten Tomatoes. So.
I like the look of the bikes when they came back from the Hollywood adventure.
The bikes were pretty cool. They had a good upgrade.
They had some armor going on, too.
Yeah. I thought those were pretty cool.
Right.
Yeah, overall, I mean, for a 1981 film, they made it look pretty cool.
I actually really liked the armor set that the King had, especially the helmet that he used.
Yeah, his helmet was probably the coolest one.
Yeah, his helmet was badass.
That nice big plume.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think, guys? Anything else of note to talk
we
about?
do,
Any favorites or anything?
Favorite scenes, yeah.
My favorite is still that speech about survival versus ideals. So because I kind of feel that way most of the time myself. So I responded pretty well to that.
Yeah, that was good. For me, my favorite, I think, would just be Tom Savini was the highlight for me. If I had to pick out a favorite, I don't know that there was a particular scene that really stood out or anything, but I just liked his character and his addition to the movie. But I also, like I said, I very much related to Billy's character too, about him sort of being torn on which direction to go, and I liked that. That was probably my favorite theme throughout.
It was those abs, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the movie does start with. Well, I have to admit, I liked that. I do agree with. I like that one line that Morgan had. That I have to like myself because everyone thinks I'm a bastard. I did like that line, and there were a couple of little lines here and there. The music overall, and one scene that we briefly touched on, the one where Billy's dishing it out to the cop at the end. I just
Okay.
like the fact that the lady behind the register was everything that
Ringing up.
got trashed. She was ringing it up to charge to the cop.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
I was hoping that's who she was charging.
That was my assumption, but yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, I agree with that. That whole end thing, where he goes back and he does a lot of introspection. He goes back to the boy who asked for his autograph at the beginning and gives him his sword. He goes basically to the cop, beats the crap out of him, and then eventually meets death head on, quite literally, and finishes it out. I actually thought that was a fine way. Shoot, if they had ended it without the funeral scene and just ended it with him being hit by the truck, I could have been okay with that.
Mhm.
Well, I felt like the funeral scene really showed us that they're gonna be okay and they're gonna move on together and they're gonna be able to do this without him. They came together
Right.
and they respected him. In the end, they really did have respect for him, even though there was some tough times.
Yeah. Like, this was a good movie. I just kind of wish it was more. I wish this was more popular, or at least that I'd had an opportunity to hear about it like sooner. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm really
Hmm.
surprised too that I hadn't heard much about it. I mean, I haven't dug real deep into Romero's filmography, but when I heard about it, I'm like, how have I not heard about this? It was one of those like, how did I skip over it? So I had to jump on it right away. So I'm glad we had an opportunity to do it. It was a fun movie to watch and definitely one I'll want to
Yeah.
revisit and probably get on Blu-ray.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's like an Arrow release or something of this, right?
So it was a
You know,
shout
I
release.
okay, Shout Factory
Yeah.
did one.
Put this
Yeah,
out.
Shot Factory did one. I have it. That's how I got a lot of the information I did as I was watching interviews. They had a Romero interview and a few other interviews with cast and crew. So that was kind
I'll
of
have to
cool.
check their website. I don't remember.
And
I didn't remember them announcing this.
extended stunt scenes as well with the motorcycles for those
Oh,
people who
cool.
like watching those.
Neat.
Yeah, definitely one worth picking up.
Actually, Jacob, you have that at your disposal right now. You're borrowing it.
Yeah, well, I admit I didn't really launch into the special features this go around, but maybe one day.
All right, guys.
Yeah.
Well, let's close things out.
Mhm.
We'll go ahead and just go around the horn and tell everybody who we are, where we're from. We'll go ahead and start with you, Dustin.
Yeah, horn. I'm Dustin, also known as the Crypt of Horrors on Twitter and also on my own channel, the Crypt of Horrors, because everything shorter was taken. So you can find me at either of those places. I'm a horror collector here in Milwaukee, and I just like showing off all the different things I picked up. I recently started doing like reviews of disc titles, and that's going to branch out into. I really want to do a review for the Netflix series Slasher. Like each season is a different story, so I'm going to probably start that up pretty soon. And there's kind of just a lot going on that I have planned for the summer, so we'll see if I actually get my butt down to shooting it.
Mhm.
Well, okay, a lot of it's shot. I just need to like edit it, and I'm bad. So I also have an Instagram for my horror collection, DHR Hunter, and we don't post as much as we should there, but follow me anyway. Do it. So yeah.
All right,
time.
thanks, Dustin. Let's hear from Brandon.
I am, of course, Septum Sen from Septum Sen versus the World, which is a YouTube channel dedicated to the art of physical media and the love of physical media. We have been doing pretty regular updates as to what's coming out in the world of media, as well as pickup videos. We do various top 10s and top 15 lists. We have a few other reviews that are coming out, one of which I believe is coming out this week. And we also have another series where I'm going to be talking a little bit about video games and my thoughts about consoles and different games on those systems. And of course, next week, it was going to be this week, but I did something as a kind of a combined project with Movies Galore, Delusion of Grandeur. I can't remember which one it would be on, which was kind of nice. But we're going to be doing another top 10, which will continue our anime influences.
Very good. And why don't we go ahead and hear from Jake?
All right, I'm Jake, and like he said, I am frequently a guest on Septum Sin versus the World. I also am a big time movie, television collector. Some emphasis on anime, but definitely a wide selection. And I actually took advantage of that time where the interview was taking the place of our usually scheduled viewing, filming, to edit a video that has been sitting on go for like 3 months. So I will finally have another video in my Criterion review series coming out this week.
Just
So
3
that'll
months?
be good. And I also have my own channel, Kotobuki Jake, which is dedicated more to nature and the natural world. I keep saying I'll get better at posting to that, and it could happen. One day, it will happen.
Is it like me where you're just lying to yourself?
Well, we'll find out eventually, I guess.
I can be organized. Nope.
All right, and as Brandon said, we have that big video coming up next week, part 2 of the anime influences list, and that should be a lot of fun. All right.
Sounds good. I'll go ahead and tell you about me, and then Dave can close us out. As usual, I'm Katie Cadaver from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm a body positive horror artist and alternative model. And you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Patreon. Just search Katie Cadaver, Cadaver with a K. I am also the makeup artist for the horror punk band Rat Bat Spider, and you can listen to them at ratbatspider.bandcamp.com, or you can come and see them if you're in the Kenosha, Wisconsin area coming up this Friday, June 14th. They're going to be at Hat Tricks. So come on down and see them. I am also a Dead Girl for Dead Girl's Dark Coffin Classics horror TV show, and you can watch episodes at vimeo.com/ddcc. I also perform and produce with Grindhouse Tees Burlesque Productions. You can find us on Facebook. And I am also a Tromette with Trauma Entertainment. And you can find all that at trauma.com. And what is the movie for next week, guys? I don't think I wrote it down.
Another horror master, actually.
Uh-oh. What is it?
It's your movie that you've got. It's the Castle film.
Oh, yeah.
For your birthday.
That would be the Mr. Sardonicus.
Sorry to put you on the spot there.
That's okay. I forgot that it was that particular film, so that's okay. Well, since I'm already speaking, I will go with my who I am. I'm David Straighty, and I sort of began this creative journey with all of y'all, and I've enjoyed every single episode, give or take. And I do reviews. I produce some films, and right now I've got 3 in the wings that I'm producing. And just recently, I just did 3 separate interviews over 3 different days. So you can definitely check out some interviews that I have out. One was with Joe Sherlock, Brad Sykes, and then Ron Ford. So Ron Ford was earlier today, and that was a blast. He was able. I messaged him, and he was like, "Hey, I'm free," and I'm like, "Cool. Oh, so we can do this now?" He's like, "Yeah, now." I'm like, "Cool. Let me get a shirt on." So.
Let me get a shirt on.
Well, I was in my morning clothes.
Which apparently involves no shirt.
But
That's the best part of living alone. You can just hang out naked all day.
Dave's famous last words.
My birthday suit.
Oh no.
No, just kidding. Anyway.
And it still has stains.
And just like that, this is now a horror discussion.
I must make you gross out forever and ever.
Birthmarks or food stains? I can't.
Oh my god. Okay, clearly we all need to go to bed.
Alrighty.
I'm feeling great. I'm gonna watch Captain Marvel.
Good times.
Alrighty. So, everyone, say good night. And stay tuned for some more great, whether it's horror or any kind of film discussion. We'll see y'all next week. Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Share and subscribe. Just do it.
Before y'all leave out, just real quick, because this involves everybody, we really need to get on
We're
next
live.
month's theme, because we've only got 2